I want to complain about something. I'll have a video in which I talk about classical Latin, which goes from the 1st century BC to the 2nd century AD, and includes authors such as Cicero and Caesar. And then I'll have to read, in the comments, something like this. If you really wanted to use the classical pronunciation, you would say Cicero and Caesar. This drives me a little crazy, and this pisses me off because of how incredibly ignorant it is. Well, how should I say this differently? Not ignorant, just challenged in basic erudition. That sounds nicer, right? The names of historical figures and places in English that are derived from Latin need in no way precisely resemble the ancient pronunciation when we use those terms in English. Why? Because English has a wonderful and fascinating history, and in other videos I'll tell you all about it. But suffice it to say that a name like Caesar has come to us through French. Modern French, the pronunciation is César, but in an older pronunciation it was something more like César, and this goes back to when it was César, and eventually we get to something, well, let's imagine something like the Italian pronunciation, Cesare. And in classical Latin, obviously, it's pronounced Caesar, Caesar. Now, there's an important reason why I wouldn't say Caesar in English, or even Caesar. Actually, there are two. Now, the English pronunciation, which comes from a version of French, not necessarily modern French, by the way, which comes ultimately from a version of later Latin and ultimately from classical Latin. It's gone through many, many steps of transformation, and we inherited that word, just as we inherited the word Milan, which there's no reason for Milan to sound like the Latin name Mediolanum or to sound like the modern Italian name Milano, any more than we should say Roma instead of Rome or Roma in English. We certainly may say Milano and Roma and Firenze, or we could say Milano, Firenze, Roma in English. But completely changing our phonology just to express those names isn't particularly easy for most people. I can do it because I enjoy that about language, but it's not natural to the phonotactic limitations of the English language. Or whatever language we speak, we expect that the borrowed terms will take on the characteristics of that language. That's why to say Caesar is actually not at all close enough to the classical Latin pronunciation to be even worthy of importing. The Latin name in classical Latin pronunciation is Caesar, Caesar. And believe it or not, those sounds don't have any direct resemblance to the corresponding sounds in most versions of English. Why? Well, the initial g sound is not k. In English, when we have an initial k sound, we have to add aspiration to it. And this is true of other unvoiced stops or occlusives. K, p, t, when initial, must have that aspiration, otherwise they don't sound like English words. No native English speaker without a lot of training is going to be able to say ga instead of ka. The next problem is that the diphthong I is not the same diphthong as in the word I or I. That is a slightly different diphthong that ends in the I vowel glide, whereas the I of Latin ends in the E vowel sound. Is this a subtle difference? Yes. Is it the same? No. So the difference between kai and gai, you can hear the difference. It's not the same. The next is that if it's Caesar, okay, so English has s, but Latin doesn't. It has s, retracted s, if we want to use the classical pronunciation. So already, the first 4 letters, kais, every one of them is completely different from the native English way of saying kais, gais, kais, gais. Each one of those sounds is a little bit different. All 3 of those sounds, the 2 consonants and the diphthong, all are different. And then the vowel, well, it's just an ah, that should be easy, right? Nope. Standard RP and General American English don't have the ah vowel sound of Italian and Spanish and Latin. Instead, we have ah, like father, and that's a different vowel sound. Does it sound similar to your ear as an English speaker? Maybe, but it's not the same. So already now we have kaisa, and then finally, perhaps the most obvious part, is my native pronunciation of English, General American, and RP don't have the r sound. So it's not going to be Caesar, but it'll be Kaisa if it's British, or Kaisar if it's American, or whatever variations there, of course, are in between from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, India, New Zealand, Australia, where English is also spoken natively by many millions of people. In any case, very few of them have a r sound. Therefore, if you take the name of Caesar from Latin, none of those sounds are in the standard varieties of English. Thus, all you do is end up completely changing it anyway to Caesar, and it's just not the same. Can you do that? Sure. Is anybody going to care? I'm not going to care, but I do care if you think that Caesar is wrong, because it's not. That's the standard pronunciation in English. Cicero, same deal. Cicero, well, we don't have the initial k, unaspirated. It's always k, so Cicero or something like that is what would come out with using normal native English phonetics. But Latin phonetics are different. Latin has a short e sound. English doesn't. It only has I. So it has to be Cicero, and that o vowel sound doesn't exist in English either. So you end up with Cicero. That's just about as far away as Cicero is from the actual pronunciation of his name in the time that he lived, which was Cicero. The spellings of those two names happen to match the classical Latin versions, which deludes people to think that they ought to be pronounced in exactly that way. I don't know why people would think this. But let's just go ahead and take other examples like Virgil or Virgil. How do you spell this name? It doesn't matter. Both spellings have been around for a long time, so you use whichever one you want, but it's definitely not Vergilius, is it? So if we say Vergilius or Virgilius, sure, you could call him Vergilius in English, or Virgilius, I guess, if you want to use English phonetics, but we already have an anglicized version of the name that's traditional in our language and in our literature, and it's Virgil. Also, there's Horace, Horatius. Are we going to start calling him Horac, Horace? It doesn't make sense. We could also just as easily use the traditional Italian or ecclesiastical pronunciation. We could say Cesar or Cicero, and it's the same thing if you want to do that in English. It doesn't matter. Those don't have to be traditional pronunciations in English. If you wanted to use them because you enjoy it, great. If you want to say Caesar and Cicero and Vergilius, knock yourself out. Those aren't the traditional pronunciations of the names in English. It doesn't really matter. And now I have a video that I can point to the next time somebody makes that kind of comment. And now you do too. Thanks for enjoying my rant. See you next time. Valete.